The race for mayor of Boston is taking shape with the emergence of new candidates, but also in new details from the campaigns about policy. To bring us up to date on her agenda for police reform, pandemic response, and education is the District 4 City Councilor, Andrea Campbell. Thank you very much for being with us, Councilor.
Thank you, Chris, for having me.
Councilor, it wasn't so long ago when you were on our show talking about police reform from the perspective of a city councilor who is working for reform. But, you have to think now in terms of being the mayor. You had a recent encounter with the police department trying to get some transparency. So you met with some, I don't know, resistance, some process details. What did you take away from that?
That action and leadership is going to be critically important as we push our department to be not only the most transparent in the country, but also more diverse, more accountable when things go terribly wrong. And the recent hearing I held as chair of the Committee on Public Safety and Criminal Justice was a little disappointing because folks from the department did not show up, and it was designed to have a conversation about where the city is with respect to a recent historic legislation that we passed to set up an Office of Police Accountability and Transparency, and other measures that would make our department more transparent and accountable. And so there's still more work to do, and I am very proud to have released recently a public safety plan that will do just that, make sure that our department is the most transparent, is the most accountable, that we regularly release data, that we have systems in place for when something goes wrong, that residents have not only clear instruction on how to seek accountability, but they also get justice as well. And so I'm proud of my plan, and of course, we'll do this as mayor of the city of Boston.
Well, I know we have reforms on the books now, and maybe there will be more in the future. But to put those into work, you need a department that will enforce, recommendations from oversight boards, maybe, and you've got to negotiate with unions about that. What do you think about taking that on?
I've already been taking that on. To be frank, I didn't need the George Floyd murder to recognize that our department still had much work to do, and that this needed to be done in partnership, not only with our department and officers and civilian employees in that department, but also in partnership with our residents and unions. I was actually proud at the hearing that we held, union representation did show up and want to be a part of the conversation, along with many others. The plan I recently puts out specific details on how we can reimagine our policing system in the city of Boston in such a way that we are rooting out racial disparities, making sure that we are investing in the root causes of violence, mental health, trauma, jobs, economic opportunity, that we are looking at the city of Boston's police department budget, which is the second largest behind our Boston Public Schools, over $400 million, close to $70 million in overtime, redirecting some of those resources to these root causes of violence. And there's more in this plan that I'm extremely proud of, and that I will absolutely enforce with action, a sense of urgency, and leadership.
What about rethinking the functions of the police department, or maybe having some of that done by other agencies?
Critically important. If we talk about, mental health and trauma, that is key to ensuring that we break cycles of criminalization. Critically important. The police department cannot do that. They definitely cannot solve incidents of violence by themselves. We need greater investment in our public health commission, but also in community-based organizations that have been doing the work for years on prevention and intervention. We need greater investment in youth development programming, in jobs for our young people, greater investment in reentry services for folks who are being released from being incarcerated, not just men, but also women. And we also need to make sure that we are taking much of these functions outside of our police department and putting them into the hands of folks who have the experience and the record of accomplishment to deliver on these, while also building trust in the community. Police officers want this. My plan was vetted by many of our officers still in the department. And so I'm proud of it, but also really looking forward to delivering on those promises as the next elected mayor of the city of Boston.
Turning to education, and this might be less about policy than crisis response, because students being left behind, that was a problem before the pandemic. Now
Right.
we see something like 40% of the high school juniors and seniors are disconnected. What needs to be done?
A lot needs to be done. We are obviously still in the midst of a public health crisis. And as we make sure folks get vaccinated and get everything they need to protect themselves, we also have to focus on our students, our teachers, and our educators and staffers. Parents want the option to send their students back. But for that to happen, we have to make sure, one, our teachers get vaccinated. So really happy that the state has prioritized them, and that started today, but also making sure that we are making up for the academic loss of our students and the mental health challenges. We can do that right now by delivering on programming, not only now, but also over the course of the summer, but also making sure, looking forward, that we are planning for how we are going to respond to these mental health challenges, the academic loss, not just for our students, but also for our teachers, that we are planning and being proactive in order for this to happen. And so I, of course, look forward to working with all of our educators, our young people, our students, and so many others to ensure that our students have everything they need, and our teachers and staff as well, to be successful.
I want to ask you about the longstanding problem with the lack of teacher diversity in the schools, plus the need for new skill sets to meet the new student populations. How do you see picking up speed on that?
Critically important, not only that our teaching staff reflect the demographics of our students. I had that going through Boston Public Schools as a student. I went to 5 BPS schools, and I always had teachers that looked like me, and it meant the world to me, and it changed my life trajectory. We need greater investment. We need to create the pipelines in partnership with our community colleges, our higher ed institutions, all of whom want to step up and actually create greater partnerships with our district on this critical issue. We also need to learn from best practices. We are blessed to have a whole host of educators who've retired from Boston Public Schools that want to play a meaningful role here and be at the table to support us in this effort. And all of the skill sets that our young people are going to need won't just come from our educators. We really have to think outside the box on how we get our students credits or certifications from our local higher ed institutions, how we get them internships, job opportunities while they're still in our schools. So when they leave, they are ready to accomplish their dreams and to go into any career they envision for themselves. That's what our district should be delivering on. And I'm excited to have included much of that in my education plan, and will absolutely deliver on that as the next elected mayor of Boston.
I want to ask you about the vaccine distribution. And I know there's a big supply problem, but short of solving that one, how do you get to narrow the gap in terms of people who really need it right now and others who might be able to wait a bit longer?
It really requires greater investment in community-based organizations who have the trusted relationships with residents, and not just all of our residents, but residents in communities of color, in immigrant communities that speak different languages, where folks show up not only to offer up translation, but who are culturally competent on making sure that these communities have the information they need. They have transportation and other logistics are covered to ensure they can get to the sites. And that also means investing in more sites in community. I was recently at Morningstar Baptist Church, which is in Mattapan, that just came online. Reggie Lewis, the same thing. We need more community-based organizations and sites that are easy for folks to get to as well.
I want to ask you about what the pandemic has maybe made a lot of us seeing more clearly about the structural racism behind health disparities. Before, we might have thought of that in terms of institutions and how people there treated the public, but lately we're seeing that structure. It's a much bigger thing. So how do you get the city to address that?
This is our moment to address that. When I jumped into this race back in September, when Marty was saying he still was going to run, I exercised that courage because I said and recognized that this country and the city of Boston is in a unique moment in time where there is a national reckoning and a local one on race, racism, systemic inequities. And folks have been demanding change. And most recently, more folks have been demanding this change in the city of Boston. And this is our opportunity to confront our own painful history of race and racism, busing, marginalization, and to do the really hard work of eradicating the persistent inequities that exist in our city because of that history. And I jumped into this race to say that I'm the leader in this moment in time to deliver not only a leadership style that brings people together to confront these issues, but someone who understands the inequities and has lived them growing up in the city of Boston. I know my story is resonating with voters across the district, across the city. We are getting out there. We feel this momentum. I definitely want to continue it, of course, and to earn the support of every resident in the city of Boston.
Well, part of your plan is to sort of reimagine the Boston Public Health Commission, or at least rethink its mission. What could that mean?
I have engaged so many public health professionals on this, and many have said right now the BPHC, the Health Commission, has a almost regulatory framework or culture. What does it mean to work in greater partnership and to allow folks who maybe are best positioned to deliver on closing gaps in health inequities, for example, to be at the table informing some of the policy, co-creating policy with us, offering up investments on all of these issues, including the other public health crisis that exists in the city of Boston. And that is what we were seeing in terms of the opioid crisis and homelessness, which has only been exacerbated at COVID-19 by COVID-19 and is on full display down at Mass and Cass, and of course in other downtown neighborhoods. Health institutions and many others want to play a role in this. So I think there's a way to modernize our health commission so that this can happen.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time once again to join us.
Thank you, Chris.
District 4 City Councilor and candidate for Mayor of Boston, Andrea Campbell. We'll have more news in just a moment.